What's up, everybody? Austin Lynn here. I am really excited and honored, first of all, to be back. This is the first video back in a long time. If you want any more information on what's been going on, you can go check out the previous intro video and announcements and all that type of stuff. But we're back. We're here, and I'm really excited about this. We're here with Mason Mennenga, right? I did get
Nailed
that
it.
right. Okay,
Nailed
cool.
it.
Yeah, I've been watching a lot of videos of you, so I should have gotten that. But yeah, no, we are here with Mason. He is at this point I'm just like want to call you like a scholar. What would you describe yourself as? I mean, at this point.
Yeah, I think maybe like public theologian is a good way to describe me. Yeah, I obviously do a lot of like theology stuff on like YouTube, and I podcast, so I do theology stuff on there. And then obviously I'm very active on like other social media. So yeah, I love to do the work that I do very like kind of publicly, very accessibly. And so that's kind of what I do in the world.
Yeah, yeah,
Or
and
one of
you.
the many things I do in the world.
Yeah, yes, and I do. You do have other things, and we'll get into all that, like your music podcast and all that stuff, and so that's cool. But I'm just really excited to talk to you, man. I mean, watching you and seeing some of the people you talk to, and there's just definitely a lot to relate and unpack. I know I recently started my deconstruction journey maybe about a year ago,
Okay.
and really started getting into that and stuff. And so you were one of the first voices, and then going back and seeing a lot of people that you've interviewed and talked about, reading a lot of your theses from college and
hmm
all that type of stuff. So for me, let's start with the beginning. What in the first place encouraged you or got your deconstruction started? What
Yeah.
got you to this place?
Yeah, so I grew up in like very prototypical conservative evangelicalism in South
Yeah.
Dakota. So, I grew up listening to every VeggieTales song and watching all the VeggieTale movies. And then obviously
Oh
eventually
yeah.
got old enough where I was in youth group. So did the whole youth group thing. We always had youth group on Wednesday nights. So went to youth group every Wednesday night and got into all the, good youth group music during that time in the 2000s and 2010s. And yeah, just like was kind of the prototypical conservative evangelical youth group kid in the 2000s. I mean, that really is true. Like, if you ever meet anybody else who grew up in that time frame in conservative evangelicalism, I'm sure we like literally had the same exact experiences. I went
Yes.
to all the mission trips, did that for a while, went to the big youth group conferences. So yeah, did all the things that every youth group kid did. Grew up in purity culture, all the things.
Yeah.
And when I was a senior in high school, I started just having like some questions about specifically purity culture at that time. I
Sure.
growing up in purity culture where I wasn't allowed to have sex before marriage, and I grew up in the kind of purity culture where you like really were discouraged to even like have like even really date pretty
Yeah,
much.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
so obviously no
Same.
dating, no kissing, certainly no sex. So obviously being like a 17, 18-year-old boy in evangelicalism, it was like very confusing, just having hormones run through my body at that time. And I was just like,
Right.
this doesn't seem to make sense. Like all my other friends, all my other peers are, dating. Some of them are having sex. Like just, they're experiencing life at like a much faster rate than I was experiencing life. And so yeah, I started to just have some like questions about like, does the Bible really say you can't have sex before marriage? Those types of things. And
Right.
so that was kind of the initial point where I was like, and no one called it deconstruction then, but I just was having questions about my faith. That's kind of how I thought about it. But growing up in conservative evangelicalism, I really was insulated from really the entire Christian tradition. Like I knew that there were Catholics and I knew that there were evangelicals, but that was kind of it. Like I had no idea
Yeah.
that there were all sorts of different kinds of Christians in the world. And so yeah, that really was kind of the start of that deconstruction process for me. And then I went to college again without having any sense that there were other types of Christians in the world. And I went to a small little Christian college. It was pretty conservative. And my first youth ministry class, I was a youth ministry major. So my first youth ministry class, we read a book called Postmodern Youth Ministry. And so I
Right.
remember thinking to myself, I don't know what the word postmodern means, but I know I'm not supposed to like it.
Yeah.
So I was really confused on the fact that like this postmodern word was connected to this youth ministry word. But I was a good college student, so I read the book because it was required, and read the book and realized really quickly like, oh my god, this author is literally asking the same kind of questions that I've been asking for like the last year. And so
Yeah.
that was a really big moment for me to recognize or realize that there was actually one other Christian in the world that was having doubts about his faith like I was.
Right.
So that was a big deal for me. And then on like the Google related search bar, so I looked up this author, and on the Google related search bar, I see people like Rob Bell and Nadia Bolz-Weber and Brian McLaren and a bunch of these different people. So at that point, I realized, oh, there's 5 other Christians kind of like
Right.
me that are having doubts and questions about their faith. And then I started reading those people and started following them on social media. And then at that point, I realized, wait, actually, there's like thousands of different Christians in the world that think kind of like I think or have been thinking. And so at that point I realized like, oh, there's actually like this whole thing called like progressive Christianity. And a lot of us were people who grew up in like conservative evangelicalism, and we changed in our faith. So that was kind of the initial start of my deconstruction. And then, obviously everything kind of fell right at the same time. Like that's when I started learning about like the actual history of hell, and started learning about like what does the Bible actually say about homosexuality, and just all the things that like come up in that deconstruction process. It all happened all at the same time. It wasn't like I had to deconstruct hell first and then I moved on to homosexuality and then I moved on to whatever. Like it
Wow.
all
You just
happened
took it.
all at the same time.
Wow. Okay. That's all. That so it's very similar to me. Again, is like I felt these way. I think I saw your stuff first, probably I think from following Kevin Max.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
and actually Kevin Max was probably the first one seeing his kind of journey and that type
Yeah.
of thing, and realizing, oh, okay, I'm not alone. And not only am I not alone, but there's people, in the bigger sphere, of the Christian, I guess, world or industry, even whatever it is now, that are also feeling that same way and asking those same questions. And so I think that's really cool. That I think for a lot of us that's kind of how we start feeling, when we first start thinking about these questions and these and all these things, and then it becomes a community. I mean, I've even, now seen watching some of the churches. I watch a lot. I watch church from home Sunday, and so it's all the online churches, and it's
Hmm.
church has now become a whole different experience for me, and being able to just feel a part of a community again and that type of thing. But I mean, I think that's so cool. I think with your journey, what so you grew up during the if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 29. I'm about to be 20, or about to
Oh,
be 30. Oh my
you're
god,
about to
about to
be
be 30
yeah.
in like a month or two. Couple
Okay,
months.
nice. So I'm 27, so I'm right behind you.
Yeah.
Probably same era. So
Yeah.
uh, but what was uh, what was like after when you started this after the deconstruction process, and you started and was it before or after the deconstruction process that you decided you're going to go to college for this and study theology and do all that type of stuff?
Yeah, so I went to a conservative Christian college, and it was there that I was like starting
Gotcha.
to deconstruct. And so one of the interesting things about like my college experience was, even though I was deconstructing, I still really had this call in my life to help other people in their faith. And so that was part of the
Yeah.
reason why I wanted to be a youth pastor still. So I went in, this conservative evangelical, going into college like that, right? And wanting to be a youth pastor. And then as I started deconstructing, and I still had this passion, I still had this calling in my life to help other people in their faith, which is again why I wanted to be a youth pastor. And so, yeah, and I still, even though my whole life completely changed, I still wanted to be a youth ministry major. So, yeah.
That's so cool. That's awesome. I do very much feel the same way. But I got so a little bit of the weird. So I grew up in the whole prophetic culture and all that type of
Okay.
stuff, and so I got the from a very young age. Like, we see you preaching and all that type of
Yeah.
stuff, and you're gonna be a pre and all that stuff. And I was like, cool. I want to be a filmmaker though, And so it was like a very weird
Yeah.
confusion and all that. But I did feel the same passion, especially. But I always approached it from a. It's kind of weird. I felt like I've always had this kind of deconstruction sense. I mean, when I was a youth leader and stuff, I remember, I was the guy that kids could, come to, and I didn't care. I wasn't gonna judge you if you opened up if you were gay or that type of thing, or like it was. I didn't care about that type of stuff. For me, it was very simple. It was like your relationship with Jesus, and love Jesus, love other people, and it's as simple as that. But I also grew up or went to a very like Lutheran high school, Lutheran private school and stuff. So they were also kind of a little bit loosey goosey more so than my evangelical church. It was funny. I would tell them, "Oh, I'm going to this church," and they're like, "Oh, you got to get out of there." And it was like, "Oh, okay. What am I? What am I doing wrong?" Um, but for you, what would you say is why is it after you got into college and you started the deconstruction process and all that, what became like your biggest concerns with modern Christianity and the modern church and kind of where that was going, especially looking back how you been raised and gone through that type of stuff.
Yeah, so much of Christianity, and it's not even just modern Christianity. Christianity has a whole history of this for
Yeah.
2,000 years now, or almost
Yes.
2,000 years, where Christianity has really coincided with power. Right? There are so many Christians in the world today, and even in the past, that have done whatever they can to have more and more power in the world to oppress people. And so,
Absolutely.
even when we look back to Constantine and his conversion, and then basically making Christianity the state religion, right? Like at that moment, Christianity completely changed, where it was a oppressed religion to now, or more or less kind of like, early on it was a very oppressed religion, and eventually it sort of became more accepted, and then eventually it became the state religion where it was
Yeah.
now the oppressor. And there's been a whole history of that, and we obviously continue to see that to this day, especially with the kind of religion I grew up in of conservative evangelicalism. And even though conservative evangelicals make a fairly small segment of the United States, right? Like they're not a majority of Americans are not conservative evangelicals, right? There is a
Right.
minority of conservative evangelicals,
Yeah.
yet
I like to say
they
they're a
make
minority
such
with a
a
loud voice.
large representation in
Yeah.
our politics, right? And
Exactly.
there are a lot more federal politicians who are conservative evangelicals than what is actually the population in America. And so I started realizing in that deconstruction process and became very concerned about like the way that Christianity was used to like weaponize and gain power to oppress people. And so that really has been my main concern, and continues to be a big concern of mine. And also realizing there's a different way to be a Christian in the world. There's a different way to follow Jesus that doesn't try to oppress people, that doesn't weaponize power to hurt and harm people. And that is the kind of Christianity I want to be a part of.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And so when you in learning all that history, that's where you start learning all that in college of Constantine and all this type of stuff and
Hmm.
going all the okay. So what for you, what became like the most like critical points that you would say besides Constantine and those like critical points in Christian history that were kind of like turning moments of concern and that type of thing?
Yeah, I don't. So there are a few moments in Christian history that whether I don't really see them as a concern, but they happen and they change the course of not just Christian history but history itself.
Yeah,
So one of the most influential books when I was in college, I still remember. I think I was like in my sophomore year in college, and I was reading this book and I wrote a paper on it. But it's by Phyllis Tickle. Phyllis Tickle was this. She passed away a number of years ago now, but she was this unbelievable uh, author that was a really important person in progressive Christianity, and she had this sort of theory of this 500-year rummage sale. Basically, her argument is that roughly every 500 years in Christian history, so obviously Christianity has been around for 2,000 years now, so
right.
we're basically there was a 500-year mark, and that's when the Great Schism happened, where basically the Eastern and Western church split, and that's where we kind of get Western Catholicism, and then we get Eastern Orthodoxy, and so there was a big split in the 500s. But
Yeah.
and I forget exactly what the invention was, but she basically marks each of these 500-year periods by an invention. Some sort of
Mhm.
technological invention happens, and it changes the
Oh
course of
wow.
history. So she mentions one at that 500-year mark where the Great Schism happens. I forget what it was or what happened in history during that time that influenced that, but and then she goes on, and then in the thousands, we get this another schism. But then she gets to the printing press in the Reformation. So the
Yes.
Reformation happened 500 years ago, and that's when the printing press happened. And that completely changed. The printing press changes com- world history. And because of its influence in the world, it completely changes Christianity, where it really democratizes Christianity, where now it's not just the theologians and priests who have all the power because they are the ones that actually read the Bible and study the scriptures. Now it's the common person can
Right.
actually read the Bible too, because we have mass printing now, mass
Yeah.
distribution, mass communication on this Bible. And so because it democratizes that, now you get people that are like, wait. Like, my priest has been telling me this and how to interpret this passage in scripture, and I disagree because now I'm reading the Bible for myself. And that
Right.
changes Christianity quite a bit when that happens, right? And so the printing press really played a huge role in changing Christianity. And so Phyllis Tickle talks about that. But then she's like, all right, so that happened 500 years ago. Now, 500 years later, we get the advent of the internet. So the internet, has been around since probably the 80s or whatever, but
Yeah.
really becomes a fixture of life in the 2000s. And that's
Yeah.
roughly 500 years after the Reformation. And
Wow.
so basically
Yeah.
she's
Jeez.
kind of arguing in this book, we are due for a massive change in Christianity. And we see that with how much Christianity and how much religion is changing, especially post Trump. Uh, I think
Yeah.
that plays another significant factor. So her argument would be, the internet really is going to be changing Christianity. And what will the change be? Well, we're in the midst of it right now. But people will look back 500 years later and think, wow, the internet completely changed the course of history and certainly changed Christianity itself. So I think less of these sort of concerns at these different moments of Christian history, but there are these really significant moments that have changed Christianity. And a lot of it is due to technological progress that has been made, these technological innovations. And so I'm really interested to see, what are the different ways Christianity is going to change. And I'm hoping to be sort of a part of it. I use the internet to
Yeah.
hopefully influence or share the kind of Christianity I want to see in the world. And so I'm very much a part of whatever maybe Phyllis Tickle was kind of envisioning of the internet changing Christianity forever. I hope to be a part of that because I want to see a more just and generous Christianity in the future. And again, I think certainly the internet is going to be a part of that.
That's all. I mean, that's so cool. I love that attitude and that optimism of like, yeah, you're gonna be a part of it. And I think you are, man. I think you already are. And by the way, everything that we've talked about so far, everybody, Mason has a channel, a YouTube channel that goes way more into depth about a lot of these topics. He's got a Patreon you can subscribe to that you can read his college papers, and I mean they're just incredible, and there's so much knowledge and so much stuff to get from those. We're just kind of covering the quick little his little thoughts before we get into in the fun stuff, which you mentioned a second ago. Good old TRUMP,
Mhm.
which is but yeah. Before we get into that, just what would you say to somebody who looks at like us progressives and deconstructionists of like, I mean, we're all these hypocrites and all these types of things. What would you say to them, like obviously in a conversational way of in a way to encourage deconstruction or to maybe shed a light of like we're not as evil as other Christians want to make
Yeah.
us out to be for
Yeah. So what would I say to the more like conservative Christian about?
yeah.
Yeah. Well, so first off, one thing I really wish conservative Christians knew about, especially those of us who left evangelicalism. There sometimes I see a lot of conservative Christians saying something along the lines of the people who deconstruct or people who leave evangelicalism were never true Christians. But
Yeah.
that is completely ridiculous. Like, again, I was the typical youth group kid. I was literally the ideal youth group kid. Like, if you go back and
Right.
you talk to any youth pastor, like what would you imagine the ideal youth group kid to be like in youth group? I would have fit all of those stereotypes, right?
Yeah.
I went to all the youth group conferences. I went to all the mission trips. I was at youth group every single Wednesday. I was a leader. I was the one that was,
Yep.
praying, volunteer to pray. Yeah, I was all the things that any youth group pastor would have wanted. I was listening to
Absolutely.
only pretty much Christian music. I did all the things that I was supposed to do as a youth group kid, as a evangelical Christian. So you're not going to get more evangelical than I was,
Right.
right? So I really was what I thought to be like the true kind of Christian, or like somebody who is trying to be as Christian as possible, right? So this idea that those of us who deconstruct were never true Christians, it's like that is so ridiculous. Like we were the ones who were saving sex for marriage. We were the ones that were listening to Christian music. We were the ones that prayed the sinner's prayer so many times, that went up at every altar call. We were those Christians. So
Exactly.
my argument is that you never deconstruct something that you didn't sincerely construct to begin with, right? The people who
Mm,
were sort of the lukewarm Christians in our youth group, they never had to really probably deconstruct because they never really constructed much of a Christian faith to begin with. But those of
yeah.
us who deconstruct because we actually sincerely constructed what we believe to be a good faith, or what we were hoping to be a good faith. And so that would be the one thing I really wish conservative Christians really understood about those of us who deconstruct or leave evangelicalism.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm right there with you because I did all the same things, all the same stuff, and on top of it, I was gay. So it was like
Mm,
I felt I'm doing the extra of like trying to pray it away, holding it in, doing
yeah.
all this type of
Hmm.
stuff, and so you really get to a point like you can't tell me that I didn't try, that I
Hmm.
didn't wasn't
Hmm.
going by the book, and um, but I think obviously not a big thing for me in watching you and watching your videos and stuff. I see a lot of passion for the LGBTQ community, and
Hmm.
then very much this Christian nationalism thing. And so I want to talk a little bit about those things because obviously very close to my heart as well too. And
Yeah.
I think again, like you said, we're in a time where we're seeing this Christian culture change and shift, to actually starting to have a conversation about these things, whereas before that wasn't even a thing. And so, especially with the LGBTQ community and stuff, what is it that you think that I mean, why is it that you think nobody or all these Christians for such a long time just decided to ignore the research or not even try
Mm.
to do it and look into like is this as accurate because it's so contradictory of the Jesus loves and accepts everybody, like so why do you think that it just took a step back of like let's
Yeah.
not look into it.
Well, I think it goes back to what I was talking about before of one of my concerns about Christianity is for a long time Christians have done whatever they can to gain as much power as possible and weaponize that
Mm,
power to oppress people, right? And so that just goes right along the lines of, oppressing LGBTQ people. And
yeah,
so Christianity obviously has an entire history of doing just that. And certainly we're at a point right now in human history where LGBTQ people are now accepted in a way that they've never been accepted before. So this is really a truly new moment in history in that regard. And so obviously a lot of Christians who have had power to oppress LGBTQ people, and now they're losing that power because LGBTQ inclusion and acceptance is becoming more and more common. They feel like
yeah,
it's threatening their power, right? And so they're just grasping for whatever they can to wield that power, uphold as much of that power as possible. And so really, I think it just comes down to power. It really is truly not about whether or not what the Bible actually says about gay people or not. Like that's not really truly the issue. If you peel back those layers enough, you realize it's really not about just does the Bible have errors? It's not really about that even. It's really truly
right.
who's in power. And a lot of conservative Christians are going to do whatever they can to uphold that power, especially as they become more and more the minority.
Yeah, absolutely. And and I think that's another big thing that you just kind of mentioned too, and it falls very much into this is that a lot of Christians still depend on like the Bible is true to every single. There is no error in the Bible and that type of thing for a lot of Christians, and so with that kind of mindset, how do you begin to approach that of like even because that's really where it's got to start before we even get to the LGBTQ stuff and all the rest. It's got to be like,
Hmm.
well, we have to start there. So you know, what's what's a good way to approach somebody who is very much in that mindset of just like, no, it's all right.
Um, well, the first thing I want those people to know is that you can both be intellectually honest about something and still love that thing.
Yeah,
Like, just because you may, not believe the same thing about the Bible as somebody else doesn't mean that you disagree with the Bible or that you don't love the Bible or that the Bible doesn't have any influence in your faith.
yeah,
So I think we can be honest about, let's take Genesis 1 for example, right? A lot of Christians think that Genesis 1 is this literal account of how creation happened, right? And so you even get some people that are literally believe that the earth was or that the world was created in 6 literal days, right? 6 24-hour days. You get some people like that, right?
yeah,
And then you realize, wait, if you actually study the Bible more, you realize that Genesis 1 is actually poetry. Well, who would ever take poetry literal, right? Like, you don't listen to a song and think that this song has to be literally true, right? In
right,
order for it to reveal truth. It doesn't have to be
absolutely.
factual in order to reveal truth, right? And so you realize, like, oh, wait, I can be intellectually honest about what the Bible is and what it's trying to be rather than, taking it as some sort of historical account or some scientific account, right? It's not trying to be a science book. It's not trying to be a history book. It's trying to
Yeah,
reveal truth about God and humanity and the world. That's what it's trying to do, right? And so when you read something like poetry, regardless of what the poem is, it could be a Mary Oliver poem or it could be Genesis 1, doesn't matter. It reveals some sort of truth about God, humanity, and the world, right? And that's the point of it. And so that's what Genesis 1, for example, is trying to do. It's trying to reveal who God is, who humans are, and what the world is. That's what it's
yeah,
trying to do. And so I think we can be intellectually honest about that. And also, just because you don't believe that the Bible isn't just full of a bunch of science or historical facts, doesn't mean that you can't still love the Bible. When I realized that the Genesis 1 again, for example, we'll just keep running with that example.
yeah,
When I
yeah,
realized Genesis 1 was poetry, I was like, I love this book even more than when
right,
I was a young earth creationist when I was in middle school. I fell in love with
absolutely.
it even more. It was so much more exciting. It was so much more interesting, and it became so much more formative in my faith. And so just because you don't believe that parts of the Bible are scientific or historical accounts doesn't mean that it can't have influence in your faith. It can still deeply form who you are in the world. And so that was really, really important to me as I became more intellectually honest about what the Bible is and what different parts of the Bible are, and also realizing I can still love the Bible even more. And so I really would love for conservative Christians to know that that's true, that you can be both intellectually honest about what the Bible is and also still love it.
That's all. Yeah, that's beautiful. I completely agree, and I love to again check out his channel for he's got a. I love your take too on like Paul, and
Mm,
how you see Paul through those eyes now, and it's a whole, it's not as literal as it's a much more. You talk about how being creative like that, it speaks to people on another level. We relate to these to stories or poems or metaphors or these types of things, and I think in ways that transcend a lot of just normal like lectures or that type of thing, or just learning the regular history of it or trying to learn
mhm.
some sort of regular lesson. Um, but with that, I think we'll transition into another big passion of mine, which is the Christian nationalism right now,
Yeah.
which is um, I very much agree, and I've felt the same way that you felt since Trump came on the scene. There was a very weird thing.
Mhm.
I was a part of a very large church. Trump came to the church.
Oh,
He,
wow.
he spoke on the pulpit. The title of the message that Sunday was "The 10 Things I Love About Trump" on a Sunday morning. um, and being a part, it was like a massive wake up call of like they've turned this guy into God in a
Mm,
very weird way. I mean,
mhm.
there was an actual picture in our local newspaper of Trump was on the pulpit and everybody had their hands out stretched to him, and it didn't feel like they were praying, but it was just this weird, like, kind of like how you put it, the Veggie Tales statue,
Yes.
type thing. So in your mind, where did you start to see the rise and concern of Christian nationalism? Where was your wake up
Yeah.
call? And
Yeah.
yeah, let's start there. Where was your
Yeah,
wake up
that's
call
a
for
it's a
that?
great question. I remember being very much a part of the, like, Tea Party movement when I
Yeah,
was younger. The Tea Party movement was this, like, reaction to Obama being elected, right? I think there was a
right.
big wake-up call for a lot of conservatives after Obama was elected, like, "Oh my god, like, the country is changing. What are we gonna
Yeah,
do about it?" And so you have all these really conservative, somewhat libertarian people that are protesting a lot of the changes that they saw in the world, right? And so I remember being a conservative teenager, being a part of all of that.
yep,
And when I sort of around that time when I started to have some of those questions about purity culture, so somewhere around like maybe my junior or senior year of high school, I started to have also some additional questions about, you know, like what's the nature of my faith and its relationship with politics? Like how should I be a Christian in the world when it comes to being a conservative? And one of those questions that kind of came up was, so in 2000, so this would have been like 2011, 2012. So a lot of states, or there was a few states at that point in the United States that were starting to legalize gay marriage. And so I remember
right.
that being a big conversation. And, as a
Yes,
conservative evangelical kid, I was starting to become really concerned that that's happening. Right. And then I started to have this kind of sense in me that, wait, like, and again, I was still like very much a conservative evangelical. So I had this like thought to myself. I was like, you know what? Gay people are for sure going to hell, but who am I to say that they can't get married? Right. So I kind of had this like slightly
right.
like different way of
Yeah,
thinking about my faith and how it should be in politics. And so obviously I kind of had more of this like libertarian bend where I'm like, I'm still very deeply conservative in terms of my values, but I
right.
also don't think that the government should have any say in this kind of thing. Right. So I kind of had this more libertarian bend. And that's when I realized, oh, wait, I might be changing in my politics a little bit here. And
Yeah,
I kind of look back at that as maybe kind of this first concern of Christian nationalism. And obviously I don't know if we even called it Christian nationalism then. At
right.
least I
Yeah,
wasn't aware of that term if that was around. But that when I look back, I'm like, oh, that would have been like kind of the first start of realizing like, okay, maybe if even if I have conservative Christian values, doesn't necessarily mean that that should be enforced by the government. And
yeah,
so that would have been kind of like maybe my first kind of moment in life where I was starting to change in that way. Because I would have been growing up thinking that, yeah, the government should just enforce conservative Christian values. And that was kind of the first moment in my life when again I was probably maybe 17 or 18 at that time, and I started to have a little bit of a differentiation there.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why that you mentioned that now. Now that I think back of it being, because I went to Christian private school basically my entire life. So
Mm,
from elementary, middle school, high school. So I remember like being a part of like when Obama was elected, right?
yeah.
And the whole thing of like every all of us, we were kids. We didn't know anything about politics, but we were just
Yeah.
repeating what our parents were saying, which is like America's over. It's done. He's going to
Mhm.
destroy everything and all this type of stuff. Um but yeah, you think about that is kind of the start. And also too, there was very much like because I remember there being some people in the church, right? Some black people in the church that were voting for Obama, and they were not looked upon kindly, and
Mm.
this kind of outcast, people the church begins to outcast people with those different opinions and stuff. But I mean, what for you, I think, is like the most dangerous thing right now about Christian nationalism and its rise.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Christian nationalism is doing whatever it can to oppress a lot of different people, whether it's people of color, queer people, women, even the planet, right? Like there are so many conservative Christians do not care at all about climate change, and some of them are even in support of things that is increasing climate change at a faster rate. And so,
Yeah.
the, Christian nationalism oppresses in all the ways that oppression happen, right? One thing that I'm really concerned about with Christian nationalism, and I mentioned it, I think in both of my videos on Christian nationalism, one thing that
Yeah.
I'm really concerned about, and whether it's the greatest threat about Christian nationalism or not, I'm not really interested in figuring out what threat
There's a
about
lot.
Christian nationalism is the
There's a
greatest.
lot.
But one threat that I don't think a lot of people maybe realize right away is I think Christian nationalism is a threat to Christianity. The reason why is the whole point of Christian nationalism again is to have this like convergence of both the state and their version of Christianity. And the
Yeah.
problem with that is it basically makes out the gospel to be do whatever you can to make Christianity enforced in the world. And it has nothing to do with this gospel that Jesus preached about liberating the oppressed, setting the captives free, declaring the year of jubilee, all these things that
Yeah.
Jesus did in his ministry, and why he said he came to the world. It has Christian nationalism has nothing to do about any of that. And so
Yeah.
I think Christian nationalism is this betrayal to the gospel itself. And I think that's a threat. It's a threat to Christianity because it betrays the gospel. And so
Absolutely.
I'm really concerned about Christian nationalism for a lot of reasons, but that's even one of the reasons, is that Christianity is being threatened by Christian nationalism.
Yeah, absolutely. The way I say it's like or the way I such it's watching Christianity get manipulated in a very weird way, and in a very, like you said, powerful way, because it's such powerful people doing it, like Trump and like the people that are backing him and that type of thing. Um, why do you think so many people are either just accept Trump as their new Christian leader and that type of thing, or are just willing to put aside, like you have this, it's like um a lot of Christians will go, well, I may not like everything he says and that type of stuff, but he's a Christian and he fights for my values, and why is it, because I think at the end of the day it's more important what he says, and it's more important um his example of saying I'm a Christian, I'm this and that, and then doing the complete opposite. uh so I don't really care about his policies or how great he is in that sense. It's about that and that kind of manipulation of Christianity in that sense. So, what would you say to those people who are looking at it as like, oh, it's the policies and the Christian values for me. I don't
Right.
care what he says.
Well, so one thing I'll say is Trump is clearly not one of these evangelical Christians, right? Like he
Right.
doesn't even talk the talk right. Like
Right.
he remember that one time he was asked, how many times he has like repented or asked for
Right.
forgiveness or whatever, and he just is like, I don't like I don't ask for repentance. Like, why
Right.
would I do that? And it's just like clear as day. Like, oh my God, this guy doesn't realize like how big of a deal that is if you are evangelical Christian, and he's like
Absolutely.
outright just like not saying the thing he's supposed to be saying, right? So it's just like clear. It's clear as day. Like he has no idea about Christianity, and certainly evangelical Christianity. Uh, and so when I see evangelical Christians in particular really try to do all of these mental gymnastics to justify their support of Trump, even though he's clearly not one of them, like they want to claim so bad that he's one of them, and he's just like
Yeah.
so not one of
Yeah.
them.
Oh yeah.
But again, if you peel back the layers, whether they're conscious of it or not, if you peel back the layers, it again all comes down to power, right? Trump gives this very small segment of people in America a massively disproportionate amount of power.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why they support this guy, right? He gives them power, he gives them access to power that they otherwise would not have. And so that's why they're willing to set aside and justify and do all these mental gymnastics to support this guy, even though he's so clearly not one of them, because he gives them power.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, if he is elected again, what do you think the future looks like for um, obviously the state of Christianity and where
Yeah.
things are? Do you think it's a backwards for the next 4 years? Do you think there's a way to, to fight through it? Because it's going to
Yeah.
be different.
Yeah, I think he's going to be very vindictive. Here's what I will. The other thing I'll say about this is that it will be bad. It like
Yeah.
without a doubt, it will be bad. It will not be a good 4 years, or he might just make himself into a dictator, so we just have him
Yeah.
until he's dead. I mean, like it will be bad.
Yeah.
And also, this can also be true. He's not the worst thing that ever happened to happen in the world, right? There have
Mm,
been so many horrible people that haven't been in leadership throughout human history. And
absolutely.
here we are as humans. We're still here. We're still doing it, right? And so I don't think that even if he gets elected, that it will be the end of humanity. It won't be the end of the world. It will be
Right.
bad. It will be probably some of the worst stuff that will ever happen in the world. And yet, I still have faith. I'm still optimistic that humanity
Yeah.
can make it out of a Trump presidency. We've done it once, and it probably will be a way worse 4 years than the first 4 years. But I still think it's possible for us to make it out. And so I don't, as bad as it will be, or it could be, I still don't think uh, we should just give up hope.
Yeah.
I think we can still have hope that there is still life is still worth living. Justice is still worth fighting for. And so even as bad as it could potentially be if he gets elected again, I still have hope that humanity will make it out.
I love that. I absolutely love that optimism. To a lot of people that are, because I still think there's still a lot of people like we talked about in the beginning, like us, that are just beginning this journey or seeing this, probably
Hmm.
because a lot of this Trump stuff, and I think that's been a big propellant for the last,
Hmm.
8 years, since he started. Of a lot of people started seeing things differently. I think especially our generation, and our group of people that grew up in the evangelical church and stuff. But with all of the election, or with everything happening right now in the world and stuff, what would you say to those who might be, in a situation where they're wanting to deconstruct, but maybe they're in a very kind of uh, conservative group, family, or something like that, where it's just
Yeah.
very discouraged. They're very, that type of thing. How do you begin that, or what would you say to somebody of
Yeah.
how to start that, and how to maybe even sometimes you have to separate yourself from some people to really, I guess, see the light.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I want that person to know that there's a better life ahead, right? I remember getting to a point when I first started deconstructing and feeling like I feel so alone in the fact that I'm questioning my faith. I feel so alone. I feel so afraid what's going to happen. And, obviously in the moment, I didn't know what's going to happen in the future. I didn't know what I was going to be like in the future. But looking back, like if I were to talk to my first deconstructing self, I want that Mason to know life is going to be better ahead. And so that's what I want other people who are maybe starting to deconstruct to know that too. Even if they're in the midst of all their entire community are super conservative people, if their entire church is all super conservative church and they feel super afraid, they feel super alone, I want you to know that there's a better life ahead. There's hope ahead. And so, even in the midst of that lonely feeling, even in the midst of the sort of fear that you might have, there is hope. There's a better life ahead. So that's what I want those folks that are maybe first starting to deconstruct to know.
That's awesome. That's beautiful. Before we wrap, because I know we just got really deep and all that. That was great, man. I really appreciate it. I like to end it off with some quick, like, fire
Let's do
round
it.
questions. Some maybe some random, some interesting, some of your thoughts on these things. But your thoughts on the supernatural, ghosts, and exorcism?
Oh, that's a great question. So I am a hopeful supernaturalist, in the sense that I think it would be really cool if things like ghosts or aliens or whatever do exist. I think it would be really great. It'd be really cool. I'd love to meet one. I haven't had my own personal experiences, so I can't at least use my own personal experience to confirm or deny the existence of those things. But I think it would be really cool if we did somehow or we're somehow able to prove that those things do exist.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right, favorite musician or band?
My favorite band of all time to this day, and has been for 15 years now, is a band called The Chariot. They broke up 10 years ago, over 10 years ago now, maybe, yeah, 11 years ago. Yeah, they broke up in
Okay,
2013. So they are no more, but they are to this day my favorite band ever.
very cool, very cool. I know your thoughts on hell. You don't really believe in an actual hell and stuff. Where do people like Hitler go?
Hmm. It's a really good question. So I think because I'm a universalist,
Yeah,
and I don't know, I'm not. I'm probably not the kind of universalist where I think that there's going to be some sort of like conscious, like every individual will have some sort of conscious, like state of bliss, or whatever you think about like heaven. Like I don't really think that like universalism in the sense that everybody goes to heaven. Like maybe heaven exists. I don't know, but I
yeah,
do believe in the sense that, or I'm a universalist in the sense that everyone, including Hitler, are restored to what God ideally, what God's hopes and dreams are for that person, right? So obviously Hitler did a lot of bad things, and he has a lot
yeah.
to repent of and to restore. To restore. And also, I think eternity is a very long time for even someone like Hitler to be restored to what God actually hopes and dreams for that person. So, whether it's Hitler, whether it's myself, doesn't matter. I think all of us will repent of the bad things that we've done in the world, the evil things that we've done in the world. And also, I think God is a God of love and goodness, and God is expansive enough to even restore the most evil things and the most evil people in the world.
I love that. I agree with you completely. I just like asking that type of because I think it's so funny when you talk to people who don't believe. You either get the person that is like, okay, well, if there is a hell, then the worst of the worst people have to go there, right? And if there isn't a hell,
Right.
where do the worst of
Right.
the worst people go? So I completely agree with you in
Yeah.
that sense. I think a lot of people miss the whole God's great grace thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of incomprehensible.
Yeah. I
Um,
don't think there's a person in the world that's irredeemable. I want to live as if
that's
that's
beautiful.
true.
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up, favorite Christian movie and or show or that type of thing. Media.
Ooh, Christian movie. Christian movie. I mean, honestly, when I was a little kid, my favorite VeggieTales movie was the Lord of the Beans. Partly because obviously I loved Lord
Oh,
of the Rings, and so this like little crossover between Lord of the Rings and VeggieTales was so cool to me. So I loved Lord of the Beans. I'm trying to think if there's like other Christian type of movies. Obviously, I was like a big uh you know evangelical kind of like in that world, so I did a lot, like consumed a lot of that kind of media. I really liked
yeah,
Facing the Giants for a while, but then I realized really quickly it was kind of a cheesy movie. I'm trying to
yeah.
think if there's any others
I
that I
thought
really
Courageous
like.
actually did a bit better than facing the Giants as far as
Probably, yeah. I'm
they
trying to
lost a
remember
bit of the
Courageous, but
cheesiness.
yeah, I never really got into a lot of like like later on, like the Facing the Giants type of like pure flicks films or whatever. I never really quite
Yeah,
got into those as much, but uh yeah, I did sort of like Facing the Giants mostly because I was like a football kid, so I kind of
yeah.
liked it for that reason. But now looking back, I'm like, that is a really freaking cheesy movie.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. All of them were, right? Looking back. But I, with that, man, I think that's pretty much we'll
Great.
conclude it and stuff. Look, I really appreciate you coming on and stuff. I hope to eventually talk to you again at some point
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
there's so much to talk about. We didn't even get into again so much to to cover in this world and sphere. I love your passion, man. I love your fire. I think it's so cool, and I think we need way more people like you. And you've kind of sparked a little inspiration in me. That's why I wanted to have you on, and I'd like to eventually have other conversations with other people too about this stuff because I think it's important. I think it needs to be
Yeah.
talked about, and I think the more that we get it out there, it's especially right now during this time, it's important. But for you, I know, like you said, you have a YouTube channel. You want to go ahead and plug yourself and let
Yeah.
everybody know where they can find you and all that and support you and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, so I got a website, masonmennenga.com. I am one of two Mason Mennengas in the world. The other Mason
Oh.
Mennenga, I think, has a Facebook account, but it probably hasn't been updated in like 15 years. So if there's a Mason Mennenga that you find on the internet, almost 100% is me. So
Okay.
yeah, find my website. From there, you can find my YouTube channel, my Twitter, all the social media stuff. You can support me on Patreon. You're one of those people, so thank you so much for your support.
Of
Yeah, and
course.
if for whatever reason you like my stuff enough to support me, you can totally do that. And yeah, that you can kind of find me anywhere. I am pretty online.
Sounds good. And we'll make sure and put all the links and everything down below. Again,
Great.
everybody, thank you for watching and everything. Make sure and check Mason out. He's got videos coming out pretty actively on his channel too, talking a lot about this stuff and definitely diving way deeper into it than we're able to cover because we just hit so many topics. But again, thank you everybody for watching and tuning in. Thank you, Mason, so much. I hope to talk to you again, and we will see you guys all later.